Well, I put it here. Okay, great. So, first of all, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and let me explain to you what I'm trying to do. Is I have this scholarship from the Faculty Resource Network at NYU, which is a sort of a consortium of universities.
Yeah.
And it's a great opportunity. So for 1 month, it's my second time doing that, so I'm really enjoying it. And I'm with a great group of people, so it's really...
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, I mean, the people working on Persian translations and a lot of very, very nice stuff. So you feel really...
That's great.
Yeah. So I'm trying to do this. I've been working a lot on education, web, and technology.
Yep.
So I thought about interviewing you and other bunch of people, not that many actually, but still to get an idea of what's going on in that field.
Yep.
Education mixed up with media.
Yep.
I don't feel there's much written on it, at least. There's a lot in the academic press, in the so-called scientific papers, etc.
Yeah.
But not that much. So the end thing is that, of course, I would like to get you talking as much as you like on the subject. But I love your take, for instance, when Carr's book came out, The Shallows, you answered through an article, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal.
Yes.
And I love that dynamics that you established,
right.
The point that you made. And I like also in your blog your position on the needs of the publishing industry.
Right. Right.
Yeah. There is a great sentence that you wrote, which is the very problem that they were supposed to solve.
Right. Stop being a problem. Right. Right. Making things public is no longer itself the hard
thing, right? So I just wonder what you think is the consequence of all these things that are happening in terms of a real revolution. I think we have a strong power of denial. Right?
Yes, evident. Just on present evidence, people can readily deny what. I mean, one of the things I often say is that my goal, not so much when talking to students who, not so much when talking to 25-year-olds as when talking to people our age, is just to get them to believe that what seems to be happening is actually happening. That in fact, just that change in worldview, that the effects you see in the world, that content is getting cheaper, it's being pulled as much as it's being pushed, that people can make and modify and share on their own, that those things which we can observe, that there's a second step, which is believing that they're happening. And once you believe that what seems to be happening is actually happening, the world looks very different from when you think, well, somewhere underneath all of this new stuff is this layer of the world I grew up with, where the professionals are the only people who get to speak in public, and there are only 3 television networks and so forth. That world is actually gone. It's not buried, it's been removed by the new material. Education, we have this conversation around here all the time, actually, as you might expect. Our director, Dan O'Sullivan, started a conversation years ago that he called the Southwest Project. And Southwest is an airline that formed in the United States, in the Southwest, and disrupted the existing airline industry because they did everything very cheap. And they just kept expanding and kept taking market share. And everybody thought, everybody in the traditional airline industry thought, oh, this, for some reason or other, this can't last, right? Eventually this will stop, but it didn't. In fact, Southwest ended up reshaping the industry. And O'Sullivan's idea of the Southwest Project was, education right now is expensive, and it's slow, and it's inefficient. But it creates things that are of obvious value to the participants. So between those two facts, there's a gap where somebody could make an interesting new model of education. And what what Dana was saying essentially is our institution, traditional, four-year college, traditional graduate programs kind of thing, is adept at all kinds of things, but changing rapidly to adapt to new circumstances is not one of those things. And so the conversation has been, is the university relatively secure enough to be able to change at its own speed, or is there going to be some externally disruptive force? The big question there isn't so much about technology as it is about social facts, essentially about society's beliefs about what constitutes an education. So if everybody has to have a diploma to get certain kinds of jobs, and if only one kind of institution is allowed to offer diplomas, and if that kind of institution doesn't want to change, there's no change. If, on the other hand, society decides some kinds of jobs don't need diplomas, I can start to look at life experience, or society says, we demand that other kinds of institutions be allowed to offer diplomas, suddenly there's going to be an explosion of change. Up until about a year ago, it looked like society was going to continue to demand that certain kinds of jobs had diplomas, and then only one kind of institution could offer them. But there's been enough conversation now around alternate models that I'm starting to change my mind. I think something disruptive could happen. Part of it is that large institutions like, say, Penn State started offering online classes. And what they discovered was, it's called their World Campus.
Yeah.
What they discovered was that a big part of their enrollment came from residential students in the traditional four-year college whose scheduling difficulties led them to take one online class a semester, just so that they would be able to work a job while they were in college. And at the same time, on the outside, you have people like Peter Thiel, who was one of the co-founders of eBay, pushing this idea that we're now in an education bubble. That education has some value, but that the amount of money we're charging for what the students are getting is now...
unproportionate.
Right, absolutely unproportionate. So we do this thing now, in fact, we're in the middle of the month where we do it. We do this thing at ITP called ITP Camp, where our alumni network is so strong and interesting. And many of them are willing to both want to come back here and spend some time teaching and learning. So some of them will show up and teach, this is what I've been doing about information visualization at the New York Times since I graduated. And another person will come back, this is what I've been doing with sensor networks since I graduated. And the existing students, plus other alumni, come and take those classes. And our primary role in that is really to just be the site of the convening and we're the people who kind of see across that network in the biggest way. But and people are plainly getting educated, and they're picking up new skills and so forth. It's very, very different from what we do during the school year. And what we don't know is, are those experiments versus the traditional 14-week classes twice a year, are they going to go like that on even wider tangents, or are they going to merge? Yeah, exactly. And that I don't know yet. Camp is new; it's only in the second year, but it's pretty clear to me that the forces that have been affecting education so far have mainly been around the information bargains around education, whether textbooks are physical or on the Kindle. Access to problem sets, Khan Academy kind of stuff. But that what's coming is the social market. You see, the famous story of this kid up at Ryerson University, Chris Avenir, who nearly got kicked out of Ryerson for forming a chemistry study group on Facebook. And his point of view was, look, we have study groups in the real world and nobody would think anything of it. I just happen to do it online. Ryerson, on the other hand, clearly upset and embarrassed that this was happening in public, felt it was bad for the brand. But they also, this was a study group with 146 people in it. You can't get a real world table that 146 people can sit around. And if there's 146 people in that Facebook group, it's a fair bet that somebody's free riding. Somebody's taking advantage without participating, because human social systems in the real world have to be free rider resistant, but human social systems on the internet can be free rider tolerant. And in a free rider tolerant system of education, people will get a diploma without getting educated at all. And that's the thing we need to defend against. So the part that I'm interested in studying, in particular social media, the part that I'm interested in isn't so much what happens to cost of access to information. That's important, but it's not, I think, the main event. The part I'm interested in is there's been a social bargain between students and faculty, between students and faculty and the administration, the overall administration of the school. But that the students' ability to communicate among themselves, to communicate with alumni, the faculty's ability to communicate among themselves, to communicate with students, and so forth, all makes parts of that bargain, ready for revisiting. The thing I'm most interested in is what kind of groups are people going to come together in to learn that don't come from the traditional classroom?
You think the will? I mean,
They're already doing it in some places. We're certainly seeing things like online study groups. There it's kind of hybridized with classes. But we're also seeing sites, and it starts, as it so often does in these things, in the gaming and geek communities, where there are sites that say, here's how you play Call of Duty, or here's some tips and tricks for Call of Duty, or here's how you build a microwave oven at home, or whatever. You go to sites like Instructables, or these kinds of things where people really are trying to help each other, right? You then look at the Stack Exchange and Stack Overflow sites, question answering sites among expert communities that amateurs can listen in from and learn. You look at the demand side, right? You look at eHow and demand media, and the content there is crappy. But what they recognize is that the audience is asking for that material. You see things like Wikipedia, where there's collaborative construction of knowledge is the entirety of the effort. So I don't believe that somehow the internet comes along and 1,000 flowers bloom, and this is all okay without any kind of structured work as well. But I do think that if you set out tomorrow to take 100 19-year-olds and educate them to the point where you felt comfortable giving them a diploma in a particular field, you would not build something that looks like a traditional college today.
You feel like that?
I do. I think you would take social networks for granted. I think you would take global access for granted. I think you would take online learning for granted. I don't think you would do an online-only college. Face-to-face is so important, but I'm not sure that you would build a building on the edge of town and move all the people in that building for 9 months a year, 4 years in a row.
So here it comes sort of a few questions out of that. First of all is the question that perhaps diploma themselves might not be that significant.
Yeah, well, this is right.
In the sense that it happens if I seek work, you interview me, and in 10 minutes you more or less get an idea of what I'm able to do. And there's people who today are picking courses online or not
Yep.
mostly online, from a lot of different
Yeah.
institutions, and they mix and match them together. The massive parallel courses like George Siemens and Jim Bloom's, etc. They also talk the same language. They're free material.
Right.
You receive credit if you pay for them, or but you don't if you don't pay.
Right.
So you have that.
And that is really interesting. That tells you in a way how deep the divide is between learning and credentialing. The fact that delivering the same quality of materials to someone who wants to learn but not get credit is a complete freebie says the system, right, the diploma has moved from being essentially proof at the end of a long process that you did what you said you would do, to becoming really a separate goal. And of course, there are all the places in which diplomas have been debauched in one way or another because people are offering substandard education, or, given that the diploma, if you could offer diplomas without having to take any of the expensive educated people, you could be a billionaire. So we want a system where the certification and the learning are really tightly bound. But what we've got right now is that very often people are checking in really for the certification. I taught at another college, not NYU, thank God. And the undergraduate program was great, but in the graduate program, it was basically continuing education that was masquerading as a master's degree. But the students were there because they could get, they were all in media businesses in Midtown. Basically, they could get a $10,000 job if they had a master's in media studies. They didn't actually care about media studies. They cared about getting a raise. And it made, as you might imagine, the learning environment, the classroom, terrible. So the separation between being able to deliver high quality educational materials, Khan Academy, University of People, George Siemens, and the amount of money that comes into play once you ask for certification is, I think, an indication that the system is splitting apart in ways. Yeah.
Schizophrenic.
Yeah, schizophrenic is a perfect word for it. Yeah, that's right.
Right. Yeah.
That's right. And I think that schizophrenia comes in part because, and I this is now pure speculation, but I have a theory about human beliefs and behaviors, which is that most of the social systems we live in are frozen accidents, right? Somebody tried something someplace between decades and centuries ago, and it worked pretty well, so they did more of that. And a system just builds up around that. I have been thinking a lot about newspapers, right? And the idea is we write about football so we can sell cars and take that money and give it to somebody who's reporting on the mayor, right? It's a crazy system, right? But no one would pay enough money to just have somebody report on the mayor, so that's how we did it for a long time. When those systems start to come apart, part of the discomfort people feel is recognizing that something you've grown up with as normal your whole life actually isn't a deep truth about the way the world works. It's just how we happen to do it around here for the last several decades or centuries. So college, really, I think there's no other class of institutions other than religions that have as deeply embedded a set of traditions and norms as colleges, right? I mean, basically, the more ridiculous an outfit you have to put on to make a public display, the greater the indication there is that there's no underlying logic you can absolutely rely on, right? Nobody has to put on a mortarboard to go build cars on an assembly line. The economic value is absolutely clear. You wear your work clothes because what you're doing and the tangible results are really clearly linked. But, and I was struck by this again this year at graduation, here we are in these ridiculous robes and these ridiculous hats, and it's all elaborately color-coded and all the rest of it. All just to hand people what's basically a receipt, right? But, you can't just hand them the receipt from the cash register. Hey, thanks for the last 4 years, see ya. You have to do this whole big performance around handing them the receipt because really it's very difficult to assess the underlying value of what the institution is doing. And the thing you said about I can talk to you for 10 minutes and get some sense of what you're doing, I wish that was true. But for a lot of fields, it's not true. And this is part of the problem. Right? If you're a programmer, and I'm a programmer, I can give you a little challenge, right? What are sometimes called FizzBuzz challenges. Code me up something that prints the numbers 1 through 100, except every time something's divisible by 3 or 5, it does something different. A few lines of code, and really a bagatelle. But somebody who freezes at that challenge, don't hire them. If I'm hiring you as an analytic economist for data that's secret to my company, being able to assess your work is much more complicated.
Yeah.
And if I'm hiring you as a researcher in my lab, where I would expect you to know more about the problem than I know, I can't assess you at all. So that, in a way, if we could find some other way besides the diploma to give employers and collaborators some confidence that...
No, I agree on that, and definitely the diploma also, in a way, testifies about the meta abilities that that don't come with credit, but still discipline, for instance, constance, and motivation, and whatever.
You did something hard for a long
work time. And that sort of stuff. Yes, that's.
And that pulls against the natural grain of the web, which is whatever it is, we're going to make it so much easier than it used to be, right? Could be buying books or shoes. It could be learning a programming language. Whatever it is, we're really going to make it so much easier. But my friend Joel Spolsky wrote this funny rant about 3 or 4 years ago, complaining about the teaching of Java, the moving of computer science programs to teach in Java. He said, because Java handles too many hard problems too easily, so that I can't tell anymore if someone's a good programmer. If they can program the few lines of Java they need to do job X, maybe they're people who've really grokked it in the way I need them to. Or maybe they're just people who know enough to handle a few lines. He said if you had an old, if you went and studied Lisp or what have you, even if you never used it in your regular life, it was so hard that if you stuck with it and if you understood it, I could say something about perseverance and course. So that...
And that is the big issue about culture in general. I mean, I want you to get out with a diploma or whatever, with being well-rounded in many areas, not only in the credits in the photography or literature you're taking. So, I mean, this is part of the discipline of learning. I want students to get into that. So I agree. That's a very difficult goal. And I believe that about the education bubble, I mean, they say it's about to explode. I mean, recently, terrible data have been published. I mean, about a huge proportion of students don't really feel any difference.
Oh, yes.
Between, I mean, entering.
No improvement in 2 years. Yeah.
No difference.
No, it's really. That's
really
extraordinary.
Depressing.
That is really depressing.
So, I mean, what sort of work are we doing?
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right. And some of that is inflationary. I have been struck often looking back now. When I graduated from high school in the Midwest in the 1980s, only a third of my class went on to any form of higher education at all. And we were basically, it was a little university town in the middle of a cornfield. So most of my high school cohort, who I didn't know at all, went on to sell or repair cars or work on their farms, what have you. There was enough there, and this is 30 years ago or something. There was enough there that it was long enough ago that a high school diploma meant something. It really people with a high school diploma were differentiated from people without in a kind of positive way, not just in a negative way. We've now made the bachelor's degree certification of the sort that for many of the jobs that I think the kids in my class wanted to do. And yet, we've maintained the kind of, polite fiction that the bachelor's degree is still about the encounter with the humanities and the rounding out of the individuals.
The liberal arts.
Exactly. And it would, although, the U.S. system of higher education is obviously extraordinary, one of the remarkable advantages that the European systems have is they can be brutally frank about what different colleges do and are for. And because we kind of have to pretend in our, America is a more egalitarian society than many societies in the world, but we are much, much less egalitarian than we pretend we are. And this is one of those cases where I think that pretending gets us into trouble, because it would be better, I think, to say, you're headed into a kind of business where you're going to need a head for numbers, and you're going to need some sense of, the history of the business, right? You're going to into insurance or, something like this. And to give people an education that assumes that outcome, that doesn't regard that as a crisis or a failure or a weird condition. But in fact, people go, they major in American studies or whatever, and then they go out and they work as bankers or car salespeople or whatever. And that's a bad mismatch. And I think it also part of the source of this 45% no improvement after 2 years, 36% no improvement after 4 years, is that they're being asked to do something that is so obviously an endurance test rather than anything else, that they just endure it to get the diploma, to get the,
Yeah, but the retention rates are also low.
No, exactly.
That's also another big issue. I don't know. I haven't yet decided if retention rates are actually measuring anything interesting.
I think that what retention rates are in at least some parts of our kind of mutual college system, I think that what retention rates are measuring is in part the gap between the way college is funded and the perceived value for the student. Because we have such a crazy quilt of loans and grants and subsidies and so forth that the cost of college is not reflected in the price. The cost of college is reflected in the time commitment, the opportunity cost. So for many students for whom college looks like an acceptable bargain from the outside because the cost is held down one way or another, in their freshman year they discover that there is an additional bundle of costs they're being asked to bear, which if they'd understood them, they wouldn't have borne. It is, and this is actually the other terrible thing about the sort of faux egalitarianism of U.S. educational conversation is we make no distinction in terms of people not going through college between people peeling off the best students and people peeling off the worst students. So when Peter Thiel, the guy who offers kids $100,000 to not go to college and start their own business, the guy is the founder of eBay, right? It operates as a certification. Peter Thiel is basically saying, my brand is at least as good as Stanford's. Which, nice work if you can get it, but that doesn't say anything about the vast majority of people for whom college is a bad idea, which is not that they're over-serving it, but that there's just this complete mismatch, between what we're asking people to do and what they actually are signing up to do, which is, I think, why they're bailing out.
And there's also, these sort of views confirm in a way what I'm looking into, some of the myths around education, and one of these myths is content. I think that the value of Stanford is not, or MIT is not content, of course, but still, I find it unbelievable that a lot of people do think, like people think that the value of the web is in information.
Right.
And so we don't seem to get the whole picture, the bigger picture.
We have always overestimated the value of access to information and underestimated the value of access to each other.
Yeah.
And that's that's as true in the educational world as it is in other fields.
And also the fact that this way we allow ourselves to perceive knowledge as a frozen body of facts or things.
Right. Right.
No,
Right. We're going to shave you off some of this
It's
block.
written there, so it's Aristotle said it, and
No, that's right. It is a sort of a Thomist way of thinking about education.
In fact, that's what I wanted to ask you about was the other thing, the other big forces that act on education and higher education are precisely those coming from the printing press.
Yes,
business,
right, exactly.
So what's happening there? I mean, if the publishing industry is collapsing in a way.
Yeah. Well, my fear is that the publishing industry is doing what the music industry did, which is the music industry had a set of bargains worked out from the beginning of radio, which said the system's leaky, people can get access to music without paying for it. But it's complicated enough, and the quality is low enough if you tape something off the radio or whatever, that although we don't love it, we'll
Close enough.
we fought it all the time. We lost in 1992 when Congress passed, the law, or Congress, voted in the law and the president signed it. And close enough. Then this happens, and everybody has low-cost access to high-quality copies, and they have fled to the provider that offers them the most locked down defenses against the market and against their own customers. So my fear is that although for the moment the academic publishers seem to have they seem to be getting the worst of it, right? Cornell is about to reveal its prices, and University of California has negotiated bulk discounts, and everybody, the Reed Elsevier business model, the publishers of the journals that are extracting thousands or tens of thousands of dollars a year are under some pressure. My fear is that because of tenure, because of the tenure committee's assessment of the quality of the journals, that some cartel is going to form to successfully prevent the widespread of knowledge, the widespread in particular scientific information for another generation.
Well, it's an interesting take on the story, because I feel that big publishers, I'm talking more about textbooks than journals in this case, are taking the revenge by forming alliances with learning management systems. So they tend to close things up by themselves again.
Right.
I'm pretty afraid of that.
And the terrifying thing is that although our mission as academics is advancing the state of the world's knowledge, public dissemination. Again, we had a creaky old system in the 20th century in which people published things in journals and it would eventually leak out and so forth. But that the journals in those days increased the speed and increased the scale at which knowledge was disseminated. The journal's business model now has been about committing themselves to decreasing the speed and decreasing the scale at which knowledge is disseminated. They have to do this. Now, ordinarily, this would set up us against them, right? Academics against journals, because we now have a medium where our deeply held beliefs about knowledge can be implemented by these tools. The thing that worries me is the administrators, not us and not our students, but the administrators of these universities also have an enormous incentive to run closed shops. Because a competitive education landscape is, it will be fine for the cheap community colleges. Certainly the support from the U.S. for those is I think, demonstrated a recognition that they're serving an important function. And it will be fine for Stanford and Yale and Duke. It's going to be hell on the middle tier of state-funded, government-funded, subsidized, moderately good education, high tuition for out-of-state, which helps fund the in-state students. if that system comes under pressure, I think that those universities might either themselves form a cartel, or they might lobby Congress to, essentially link the university business model and the journal business model so tightly that they can't be broken. And that would be, I think it would be bad for both groups in the long haul.
And the copyright stuff is right in the middle of
Exactly
all
right.
that.
That is exactly right.
But that will, what do you think? Will that change through all these forces?
I don't know. I can tell myself two different stories. I can tell myself the story of, in the next 5 years, a new bargain gets formed whereby the copyright holders accept a degree of leakiness, in return for which the anti-copyright maximalists accept that things do spread publicly, but eventually. So copyright goes from being a model of stocks of information to being a model of flow. That information flows downhill to the public, but the speed at which it flows isn't as fast as the anti-copyright groups would like, but it isn't as slow as the copyright groups would like. It's this new bargain. I could also tell you a story that says there are two different worlds. There is a world of completely locked down IP that is only viewable on completely locked down devices. And there is the thing we used to call the internet before it subdivided, in which freely created material flows freely. So it's the Creative Commons license over here, and it's the copyright maximus over there. And it's all legal under copyright law, right? But the direction of the iPhone and the iPad and all the rest of it means that just the world that I've grown up and lived in for the last 20 years is torn apart. That people get tired of computers. They get tired of general purpose devices that can do anything with digital data that anyone wants. That users get tired of it because it's exhausting to have to understand how your machine works, and hence
Just said it, they will
exactly,
disappear.
exactly. And right, the computers become essentially for the professionals, and the amateurs are given devices that are not very good for creating or sharing in return for having devices that are good. So
That's a very sad story.
it is a sad story. That is a story that keeps me awake at night.
Yeah.
I mean that story is alarming. I've been heartened by the number of people I see traveling with iPads who also travel with keyboards. So there is, I think, a sense that actually I'm used enough to creating, even if only creating text, I'm used enough to creating that the limitations of this device cause me to take a second device. People are starting to make iPad screens that have folding keyboards. There are those Bluetooth laser keyboards. So I am optimistic about the desire for creativity expressing itself wherever there's a little bit of a wedge.
But there are big forces that go against that.
Exactly. But that optimism is tempered by the amount of money. I mean,
and the big generation that actually created the internet is vanishing, and there's a new generation that really couldn't care less.
Right. I mean, in the old days, you had to essentially understand something about the medium in order to use it, and now you don't. Now it just works, which is a boon in many ways. But one of the places where it is not a boon is that no one understands that the freedoms we enjoy on the internet come from civic commitments to a certain kind of engineering, and not just as a side effect of the world being the way it is.
Yeah, that's very true. Civics.
So what are you all doing with the web and education and all of these forces? I mean, what are you experimenting with? What are you seeing?
Well, what I'm seeing is a nice lesson that I think we learned from distance education in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
We learned a lot of hard lessons. For instance, lecture.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the first model that went, with the new electronic technologies,
Yep.
distance education is much older than that.
Yeah, of course.
So we're learning that, and we're learning that we are at a very important point in time and history in which something is happening. And I don't really exactly know what is happening. I know that universities are the slowest entities on earth to react to what's happening. I mean, it took so long to accept the printed press, imagine. I mean, the internet itself, I mean, it took a long time to embrace it. And really, and now we're not, for instance, we're not helping the internet, at least in many universities. We're sort of seeing the internet as, well, it's there, we're using it, but what are we doing towards it? Not all. So what I'm doing is, for instance, recently I've been working on a STEM project in helping, as the Congress is interested into helping more Hispanics get into the science.
Oh, nice.
Areas.
Right.
And that's something that I do believe, in general, not only for Hispanics, in the sense that there's a very strong misconception about science, and that worries me a lot. Science is often perceived by the media and by the people as something, at times evil, at times too techy, and but it's there. I mean, let's leave it there.
Yeah, so it's away from society. Yeah, that's right.
And sometimes the use of language also reveals the way we feel about science. Sometimes there's a lot of people saying, well, I mean, let's work science humanistically. I mean, as if, I mean, in the Renaissance, and I mean, from the Greeks on, and the Chinese science was separated from the humane things. So I'm working to, I wouldn't be as arrogant as saying to close that gap, but I'm trying to
pushing
to work that.
Yeah.
And in terms of how all this is coming together, is well, I decided for once to use this time in New York. I have a full month in which I can really think about this. Almost only about having good food and friends.
The things you think about it.
That's good. And good cinema. But I'm trying to write a sort of a pamphlet. I don't know yet what will come out. So beginning from the myths of teaching and learning and technology, because there are many, starting from the delivery thing. The language again reveals how we think about this sort of stuff. And starting from the myths of teaching and learning, I'm trying to figure out case studies, lessons learned, and things. So I want to do something as sense of dissemination. To give faculty and people interested in higher education something to hopefully think about.
Have you looked at University of the People?
I have not that really much.
I'm really curious about it because it's just like Khan Academy, but a little more structured, longer form and so forth. But some of the same impulse. But what's interesting to me about it, as a citizen of NYU is we've now partnered with them. John Sexton, our president, has said essentially, we want to view you as an intake valve. And I think what John is thinking, this is pure speculation. I can't claim to be privy to his inside thoughts. But what he seems to be doing is saying your incoming freshman class in any given year is your single most valuable asset, because that is the thing that sets the tone for the people who come after. Those are the people who ratify the decisions of the people who made before. Like every year, renewing with smart, interesting, engaged, diverse group of people makes the institution what it is. And he has said, I think, a little bit like what happened here in baseball in the 90s when people started looking at statistics and seeing the gap between which players thought people were good and which players were actually good. I think what John is saying is If we take the word globalization seriously, it's about importing, not just about exporting. And I think he's trying to find the talented students wherever they are in the world and get them to NYU, whether it's here, Abu Dhabi, or Shanghai, or whatever. And the thing he said that was most striking about this University of the People is it doesn't offer a degree, but he views it as an intake valve for people who ought to be in college and aren't. And I thought that's, I mean, so that's the Plan A model. That's the university reinvents itself. And, there was a lot of Plan A talk in the 1990s during the dot-com boom when everybody was going to start a for-profit arm, NYU was going to do it, Columbia was going to do it. It was all a disaster. It was in part a disaster because the idea was we'll just take what the professors are currently doing and we'll just port it to the web and be done. And it's exactly as you said, right, that no one was really thinking about what is core to education and how do we reinvent it for this medium. It was just, videotape something and throw it on. And I think that the University of the People thing says if we can find a high school student who didn't go to a good school and didn't come from a brilliant family and hasn't played, lacrosse and worked at Habitat for Humanity, but is the kind of person who's really sharp and interesting, we get an advantage that other schools don't have if we can recognize that person.
Yeah, that's a very nice shift.
Yeah, and whether it works or not, I don't know, but that, I think, is the other interesting thing about Khan Academy, George Siemens University of People, is whatever else you could say about that student population, they are people who are self-selecting to learn without the promise of a diploma. And finding that is...
kind of motivation and self-confidence is rare.
Right.
I mean, it's important to do that.
Right. So it will be interesting to see what comes to that as well. But since you're at NYU, and since we just announced this partnership, I think last Friday or something, it might be worth finding somebody over at the president's office, or whoever from our side is talking to University of the People, and just see what they're thinking. Because it's a big interesting experience. The other person you should talk to is Heather Stewart over at GTS, Global Technology Services. We now have two IT departments. One is ITS, Information Technology and Services, but the other is called GTS, and it's set up just to deal with the problems of globalizing this institution. And they will also have an interesting view about this stuff because they think obviously about distance learning, but also shared data sets and student-to-student collaboration across campuses and all the rest of it.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. I will try. I have meetings with some other professor from NYU. I have a meeting with an interview with people at CUNY, at Baruch College, and I have an interview pending with Paul Levinson, and so I guess that by the end of the month I'm going to have a pretty good idea and also what people really think about this stuff.
And obviously I'd be very curious when you write or publish something. I'd be very curious to see what you.
Oh, thanks.
So let me know. I mean, we're all net consumers of each other's intuitions now. There is no obvious right model for this.
Yeah. Well, I don't really think I would come up with a model, but
no. But I mean, this is what I mean: is that since there is no obvious model, just anyone who's got any intuitions about. We can separate this thing from that thing and say this one works and that one doesn't. That's just right now, that's a huge service.
Yeah, I love all this experimenting that are going on, like you said in the newspaper article. And without knowing well that's the purpose of an experiment. If you knew
what it was, you wouldn't do the experiment. Exactly.
So, what this friend of mine, Jim Broom, is doing at the University of Mary Washington, for instance, is absolutely unbelievable. He's mounting a radio station, a free radio station. I mean, fighting against, not really fighting, but already the things about copyright and this sort of stuff. And a radio station which is driven 24 hours a day. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's self-driven. It's really amazing. So this sort of an experiment really paved the
Yes,
way.
visitors.
Very good.
Are you expecting any